Imagine a world where your own thoughts can condemn you to death, where love is forbidden, history is rewritten daily, and the very concept of objective reality has been abolished, where the state doesn't just control your actions, it demands to control your mind, your memories, your innermost beliefs. This isn't fantasy. This is the logical endpoint of totalitarianism taken to its absolute conclusion. In a society built on lies, one man tried to remember what truth felt like. The city exists in perpetual decay. Bombed-out buildings stand as skeletal reminders of a war that never seems to end. The streets smell of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. Dust penetrates everything: homes, offices, lungs. The architecture is brutal, designed to diminish rather than inspire. Enormous posters dominate every wall, depicting a man's face, powerful, calm, grotesque in its omnipresence. The caption beneath reads simply, "Big Brother is watching you." This is Airstrip One, formerly known as London, now a province of Oceania. The year officially is 1984, though even this is uncertain. Time itself has become unreliable in a place where the past is constantly being altered to serve the present. The population lives under the rule of the party, an organization that has perfected the machinery of oppression beyond anything previous dictatorships achieved. The party doesn't merely demand obedience, it demands love. It doesn't just want to control behavior, it wants to reshape human consciousness itself, to eliminate the very possibility of dissent by destroying the mental framework that makes dissent conceivable. Winston Smith works at the Ministry of Truth. The name is the first of many inversions. The Ministry of Truth produces lies. Its function is to rewrite history continuously, altering newspapers, books, photographs, and records to ensure the past always aligns with the party's current position. If the party declares that Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, then every document must be changed to reflect this truth, even if last week all documents stated that East Asia was an ally. Winston's job is to make these alterations. He sits in a small cubicle, receives instructions through a pneumatic tube, retrieves the relevant documents, makes the necessary changes, and sends the originals down a chute leading to furnaces that consume all evidence of the past. It's meticulous work. It's also utterly meaningless, because he knows he's creating fiction. This knowledge isolates him. Most citizens have embraced doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously and accept both as true. They can remember that the chocolate ration was reduced yesterday and simultaneously believe the party's announcement that the ration has been increased. This isn't mere lying, it's something deeper, the willful destruction of one's own capacity for rational thought. Winston cannot fully embrace doublethink. Some part of him retains the ability to recognize contradiction, to remember what actually happened, to distinguish between truth and falsehood. This makes him dangerous. It also makes him profoundly alone. The party has organized society into a rigid hierarchy. At the top are the inner party members, perhaps 2% of the population, who enjoy relative comfort and make the decisions. Below them are the outer party members, like Winston, the functionaries, the bureaucrats, the workers who maintain the system. They live in decaying apartment blocks, eat synthetic food, drink victory gin that tastes like acid, and exist under constant surveillance. At the bottom are the proles, the vast majority of the population, who live in poverty but are largely ignored by the party because they're considered incapable of organized resistance. Surveillance is total. Every room contains a telescreen, a device that broadcasts party propaganda continuously and simultaneously watches whoever is present. The telescreens cannot be turned off. They monitor for signs of thought crime, the wrong expression, the wrong word muttered during sleep, any indication that one's thoughts deviate from party orthodoxy. Even beyond the telescreens, surveillance is maintained through social pressure. Children are indoctrinated to spy on their parents and report any suspicious behavior. Neighbors watch neighbors. Co-workers watch co-workers. Trust is impossible. Love is greatest crime of all. Winston begins keeping a diary. This is an act of rebellion so profound it almost certainly means death if discovered. Writing requires thought. Thought requires perspective. Perspective requires some conception of an objective reality beyond party pronouncements. The very act of recording his own observations is a form of resistance. He writes in an alcove in his apartment, just out of view of the telescreen. He knows this doesn't make him safe, only slightly less visible. He writes about his hatred of Big Brother, about his fragmentary memories of the past, about his certainty that the party's version of reality is false. But what can one man's memory accomplish against an entire state apparatus dedicated to controlling the past? If all records say something happened and everyone believes it happened, and disagreeing means torture and death, then in what meaningful sense did it not happen? Winston works alongside a woman named Julia. She's younger, energetic, and a member of the Junior Anti-Sex League, an organization that promotes complete celibacy except for procreation. Winston initially assumes she's a party loyalist, perhaps even an agent of the thought police. When she slips him a note that reads, "I love you," his entire world shifts. They begin an affair. This is not romance in any conventional sense. This is rebellion. The party has worked to eliminate sexual desire because it creates loyalty to something other than the state. By channeling that energy into love for Big Brother, the party maintains total devotion. Sexual relationships threaten this. Winston and Julia meet in secret, in the countryside, in the ruins of destroyed churches, eventually in a rented room above a shop in the Pearl district. The room has no telescreen. For the first time in decades, Winston experiences privacy. He can speak freely. He can think freely. He can simply exist without performing loyalty. Julia's rebellion is different from Winston's. She doesn't care about the philosophical implications of the party's lies. She doesn't want to understand how the system works. She just wants to carve out private spaces where she can live on her own terms. She breaks the rules constantly, but doesn't question the underlying structure. Winston wants more. He wants to understand. He wants to remember. He believes that objective truth exists somewhere, even if no one alive can access it. He becomes convinced that a member of the inner party named O'Brien is secretly opposed to the regime. This conviction is based on almost nothing, an glance exchanged during a 2-minute hate session, an intuition, a desperate hope. Winston and Julia visit O'Brien's apartment and declare themselves enemies of the party. O'Brien receives them warmly. He confirms their suspicions. He tells them about the Brotherhood, a secret organization working to overthrow Big Brother. He gives Winston a forbidden book written by Emanuel Goldstein, the legendary enemy of the state. The book explains the mechanics of the system. It describes how the 3 superstates, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, maintain perpetual war not to achieve victory, but to consume resources and keep populations controlled. War is permanent because peace would be dangerous. Peace would allow prosperity. Prosperity would give people time to think, to question, to demand freedom. The party maintains power through a carefully calibrated system of oppression. The proles are kept ignorant and distracted. The outer party is kept under surveillance and pressure. The inner party is kept loyal through privilege and participation in power. Most crucially, the party has developed Newspeak, a language specifically designed to make thought crime impossible by eliminating the words necessary to express dissent. If there is no word for freedom, how can one conceive of freedom? If rebellion, autonomy, and independence have all been removed from the language, how can anyone imagine alternatives to party rule? Newspeak isn't just censorship, it's the systematic destruction of the human capacity for critical thought. Winston reads the book in the rented room with Julia beside him. He's finally found confirmation that his perceptions aren't insane, that the contradictions he's noticed are real, that resistance exists. For the first time since he can remember, he feels hope. Then the thought police arrived. They'd been watching all along. The room above the shop was a trap. The proprietor was an agent. O'Brien wasn't a rebel, he was an interrogator. The entire elaborate setup existed solely to identify and capture thought criminals, to let them reveal themselves completely before arrest. Winston is taken to the Ministry of Love. Another inversion. The Ministry of Love is where enemies of the state are tortured. It's a vast building with no windows, only artificial light. Prisoners are held in cells where the lights never dim, where telescreens monitor constantly, where guards beat anyone who moves without permission. Winston is beaten, starved, and broken physically. But the physical torture is merely preparation. The real work begins when O'Brien arrives for the interrogation. O'Brien explains that Winston's arrest was inevitable. They'd been watching him for years. Every act of rebellion was observed and recorded. They allowed him to continue because thought criminals are more useful when permitted to fully develop their dissent before correction. The interrogation isn't about extracting information. The party already knows everything. The interrogation is about transformation. O'Brien's job is not to make Winston confess, it's to make him believe. The torture becomes sophisticated, calibrated precisely to Winston's psychology. O'Brien uses a device that delivers electric shocks of varying intensity. He asks Winston questions. How many fingers am I holding up? When Winston says 4 and O'Brien insists the answer is 5, and Winston continues to say 4, the pain increases until Winston genuinely believes he sees 5 fingers. This is the essence of the party's power. Not just forcing Winston to say he sees 5 fingers, but actually rewiring his perception so that he does see 5 fingers. Not extracting false confessions, but restructuring consciousness itself. O'Brien explains the party's philosophy with chilling clarity. The party seeks power for its own sake, not power as a means to prosperity or justice or any other goal. Power itself is the goal. The party wants power over human beings because dominating consciousness is the ultimate achievement. Past dictatorships failed because they claimed to be temporary. They said they used oppression in the service of some future utopia. This was their weakness because it meant accepting limits to their authority. The party has no such limits. It doesn't promise a better future. It doesn't claim to serve any higher purpose. It simply exercises power because it can, forever, with no restraint and no justification beyond power itself. O'Brien shows Winston his own diary, his private thoughts, all preserved and analyzed. He shows him photographs that prove the party's version of history is false. Then he burns the photographs. The point isn't that the party's version is true. The point is that truth itself is meaningless. If the party says something and all evidence of contradiction is destroyed and everyone believes it, then it is true in every sense that matters. Reality, O'Brien insists, exists only in the human mind. Since the party controls all minds, the party controls reality. If the party says 2 plus 2 equals 5, then 2 plus 2 equals 5. Not as a lie, but as actual truth, because truth is whatever the party declares it to be. Winston resists. Despite the torture, despite the psychological manipulation, some core part of him continues to believe that objective reality exists independent of human belief. He clings to a simple mathematical truth: 2 plus 2 equals 4. This becomes his final rebellion. O'Brien responds with escalating brutality. The torture continues for weeks, perhaps months. Time becomes meaningless. Winston is broken down systematically, physically, mentally, emotionally. He confesses to crimes he didn't commit. He betrays everyone he knows. He says whatever they want him to say. But O'Brien knows the difference between saying and believing. Forcing Winston to confess means nothing. The goal is to make him genuinely believe, to destroy his capacity for independent thought entirely. Winston is taken to room 101. Every prisoner eventually goes to room 101. It contains the worst thing in the world, customized for each prisoner's deepest fear. For Winston, it's rats. Not just fear of rats, but a profound, visceral terror so intense it overrides every other consideration. O'Brien brings a cage containing starving rats and positions it to attack Winston's face. The only way to stop it is to redirect the torture to someone else. Winston screams for them to do it to Julia instead. Not as a strategic calculation, not as a false confession. He genuinely, desperately wants Julia to suffer instead of him. His love for her, the one authentic emotion he had left, is destroyed completely. This is what the party wanted. Not obedience, not confession. Complete psychological transformation. The elimination of Winston's ability to maintain any loyalty, any attachment, any value system independent of the party's will. He's released eventually. The party doesn't execute thought criminals immediately. They break them first, reprogram them, then release them back into society as living demonstrations of the party's power. Winston sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, drinking victory gin, staring at the telescreen, waiting to be executed when the party decides he's no longer useful. He sees Julia once more by chance. They're polite, distant. She confesses she betrayed him. He confesses he betrayed her. Neither cares. The emotions that once connected them have been surgically removed. Winston looks at a poster of Big Brother. He realizes he loves Big Brother. Not as a lie, not as a performance. He genuinely, authentically loves Big Brother. The transformation is complete. The party has won not by killing him, but by making him into someone who wants what the party wants, who believes what the party says, who loves what the party demands he love. This is the ultimate horror, not death, but the destruction of self. The party doesn't just kill dissidents, it erases them from the inside out, removing everything that made them individuals and replacing it with perfect obedience. The society depicted here represents totalitarianism's logical conclusion. Previous tyrannies maintained power through force, but ultimately depended on some level of genuine belief or at least passive acceptance. This system has eliminated the need for belief by making belief itself a tool of oppression. Through doublethink, Newspeak, and constant surveillance, it has created a population that polices its own thoughts, that actively destroys its own capacity for critical thinking. The technology enables the oppression, but the real mechanism is psychological. The telescreens could be destroyed, the thought police could be overwhelmed, but the population won't rebel because rebellion requires the ability to imagine alternatives, and that ability has been systematically destroyed. Language is the key battleground. By controlling language, the party controls thought. By eliminating words, it eliminates concepts. By creating newspeak, it makes dissent literally unthinkable. not just dangerous, but impossible to formulate mentally. The perpetual war serves multiple functions. It justifies privation and sacrifice. It provides an external enemy to hate, channeling aggression away from the party. It consumes economic resources that might otherwise create prosperity and leisure. Most importantly, it creates a permanent emergency that justifies unlimited party authority. The class structure is carefully maintained. The proles are numerous but disorganized, capable of labor but considered incapable of political consciousness. The outer party is intelligent enough to run the bureaucracy, but is kept under sufficient pressure to prevent coordination. The inner party enjoys privilege but remains committed to the system because it. What makes this particularly chilling is its plausibility. Every element has a historical precedent. States have rewritten history. Languages have been manipulated for political purposes. Surveillance has been used to control populations. Torture has been employed to extract not just confessions, but genuine conversions. The innovation here is combining all these elements into one comprehensive system with no purpose beyond its own perpetuation. The absence of hope is deliberate. Traditional dystopias suggest that resistance is possible, that tyranny contains the seeds of its own destruction. This system is designed to be permanent. It anticipates resistance and incorporates it into the mechanism of control. By allowing thought criminals to exist briefly before destroying them, the party demonstrates its power and eliminates threats simultaneously. Winston's fate demonstrates that individual rebellion is futile against a system this comprehensive. His attempt to maintain private thoughts, private relationships, private reality, all of it was observed, permitted, and ultimately used to achieve his destruction. The system doesn't fear individual dissent, it uses it as raw material for demonstrating power. The relationship between truth and power is inverted. Normally, power requires some relationship with truth. Leaders who completely ignore reality eventually face consequences. But when power extends to controlling perception itself, when reality exists only in minds that the state controls, then truth becomes whatever the state declares. The party doesn't need to make true statements, it needs only to control what is perceived as true. This represents the death of objective reality as a meaningful concept. If all evidence can be destroyed, all memories can be altered, all perceptions can be controlled, then what does it mean to say something really happened? The philosophical question becomes practical and terrifying. The love between Winston and Julia wasn't defeated by separation or even torture. It was erased by forcing each of them to betray each other so completely that the emotion itself ceased to exist. The party understands that killing lovers makes them martyrs, but making them betray each other destroys the very thing that made the relationship threatening. Room 101 represents the final insight into the party's understanding of human psychology. They don't torture Winston with what he thinks his principles are. They torture him with his deepest, most primitive fear, something below reason, below politics, below conscious control. They demonstrate that no matter how committed someone is to their beliefs, there's always a point where self-preservation overrides everything else. The victory is absolute. Winston doesn't merely obey. He doesn't merely pretend to believe. He actually believes. The part of him that could distinguish truth from fiction has been destroyed. When he looks at Big Brother's face and feels love, it's real love, as authentic as any emotion he's ever experienced. The party has achieved what every totalitarian state dreams of. Not just compliance, but genuine, heartfelt devotion from someone who once hated them. This is the warning, not that tyranny might oppress people, but that tyranny might succeed completely. that the human capacity for independent thought, for objective reasoning, for maintaining private mental space, all of it can be destroyed through sufficient pressure applied systematically over time. The question left hanging is whether this is inevitable, whether technological surveillance combined with psychological manipulation will always lead here, whether human beings can maintain their capacity for independent thought in the face of overwhelming pressure to conform, whether truth can survive as a meaningful concept when power extends to controlling perception itself. Winston's final thoughts, sitting in the cafe, loving Big Brother, waiting for the bullet that will eventually end his worthless life, suggest the answer is no. The individual cannot defeat the system. Truth cannot survive when power is absolute. Reality itself bends to those who control how reality is perceived. But the fact that this story exists, that it can be told, that readers can recognize the warning, suggests something else. Understanding the mechanism of oppression is itself a form of resistance. That naming the techniques makes them slightly less effective. That even in a world of total surveillance and thought control, the idea that truth exists independently of power continues to haunt the system. The party won inside the story, but the story itself exists as testimony that power's victory over truth is never quite complete, never quite permanent, never quite inevitable. As long as someone somewhere can say 2 + 2 = 4 and mean it, the war isn't over. The boot stamping on a human face forever, that's the image O'Brien offers. But the fact that we recoil from it, that we recognize it as horror rather than aspiration, that we can imagine Winston's suffering and feel it as tragedy rather than justice, suggests that the capacity for human dignity survives even the most comprehensive attempt to destroy it. This is the tension the narrative cannot resolve, between the total victory of the party within its world and the total failure of that victory to convince anyone outside that world that such a victory is acceptable or inevitable or represents anything other than the most profound evil human beings can inflict upon each other.